Thank you for having me. I have to tell you, with COVID, it was like the perfect storm. I've always wanted to have a place in downtown Lee Summit. Since I was a kid, I'd come and Christmas shop. And so my business colleague, Beth, is not here today, but we finally got to where we're like, okay, let's do it. Let's make a jump. Let's buy a place. 3 months later, COVID hit. And so it's been one of those things that we kind of didn't have the momentum to participate in things with Chamber of Commerce and other committees. So I'm excited to finally be able to and have whatever normalcy is return. But one thing that really came to the surface was the stress that everybody has endured, still enduring, and I think we have forgotten about the fact that we really have to be kind to our brain. And I didn't even know there was a name to it, but a fellow colleague of mine who is a sports psychologist in Boston, she was talking about her executive coaching. I was like, well, what is executive coaching? And she's like, basically it's sports performance for the business world, right? When you show up for work, how do you optimize your performance? How do you make sure that when everything has gone to chaos, that you're able to bring calmness? Or when some people are doing tactical, like how do they go into these high risk, high stress situations and be able to get in the zone? So that's what I hope to talk about today. I think you're going to be surprised in the fact that myself, Sarah, and Beth and we have a little bit different approach when it comes to nutrition, because we really look at the behavioral piece of it, which usually translates into our choices. So don't worry, that's not a quiz. I couldn't even tell you what all the parts are on the brain. I just thought it was a pretty graphic, to be honest. Okay. So for today, what I hope is that you look at performance in how effective you are in the workplace and when you get home. A lot of times I think people are so pulled that when they get home and they got a 2-year-old standing at the door or whoever else, they got nothing left. And they want to be able to have both, and I firmly believe that you can. Creativity. I don't know about you guys, but that was another thing through burnout. I like to be able to see my clients, but I also like to write. I like to be able to be creative on social media and present. And I lose that when I don't have that time for my brain to be able to, as we say, clear the cobwebs and have that creative space and have that outlet. Another big thing that has finally gotten attention in America, but has always been that way in Western medicine, is this connection between the brain and the gut. And we're going to talk about that as well. Understand what are signs of an underfueled and underrested brain, and then how you can optimize fueling throughout the day. Because the last thing I want you guys to feel is, here's another to-do list. Now I'm going to have all this complicated nutrition, where I think sometimes we've overcomplicated. I'm going to help simplify it. So you're going to see his book here in a minute, but I'm a huge fan of Dr. John Sullivan. So he was actually a sports psychologist that worked with the Patriots. But he was the very first one to implement nap rooms. Like, how cool is that? Like, almost 10 years ago, they have nap rooms that they go in, they take power naps, and they were able to see the longevity in the career. Injuries went down, and they were actually able to retain, and they had shorter days at practice when they had these naps. And so he also does this within the military. So he talks about how when he works with like the snipers, you're going into very, very tense situations, and he can teach them how to focus, bring their heart rate down, because we don't want a sniper that's got a hand that's going all over the place with the heart rate of 200, and be able to then go home and take care of themselves. So this is one of my favorite quotes from his book, where he talks about how an underrested brain and central nervous system, so that's directly coming from our brain to our body, is weakened and degraded. He might even use the word traumatized when we don't have enough rest. The more it's underrested, the more we're unable to be mentally tough. So this is one of my favorite sayings. What happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas, but we're not talking about Las Vegas, so don't worry, guys. The vagus nerve is the only nerve in the human body that connects from our brain to our gut, to our heart, and to our lung. So who's willing to be a willing participant? You? Okay. Tell me what you're very, very scared of.
Having one of my children kidnapped.
Oh, yikes, we had to go there. Okay.
Sorry.
I usually say something like Pennywise the It Clown or something like that.
Very, very.
Yeah, he did what I asked him to, didn't he? All right, so imagine you see your kid walking across, right? And it's 6 o'clock at night, and you're sitting at, what's the restaurant you told me I need to go try? Firebirds?
Yes.
All right, you're sitting in the parking lot of Firebirds. You see your kid walking, and all of a sudden some stranger comes by. The car's parked in front of him, you can't see your kid, right? How is your body responding?
Probably fight or flight mode.
All right, so what's your heart rate doing?
Jacking up.
Right? You're breathing heavy, right? Yeah. Are you hungry now?
No.
Did you see everybody walking by you into the restaurant?
No.
Did you notice that your kid was holding a balloon?
Yes.
You did?
No.
Okay, but the car's in the way, so you can't really? That's all right. There's no right or wrong to it. But I bring this up in the fact that one of the things they've talked about that they feel like the health decline in America is we become this country of disassociation or disconnectedness. So when we pull into fight or flight, that separates from our body's needs, and we really don't know how to align it, and then we just kind of get stuck in that mode. And so it may be you're in a high stress situation at a meeting, and it's during lunchtime, and all of a sudden shit hits the fan and you don't eat, but then 4 o'clock later, you're starving to death and you wonder why you're at the vending machine. So these are things that I'm going to talk about and how that brain works with what we need, why we end up choosing it, and how we can work on both of those. So thank you for humoring me. I know that wasn't a fun one to go over. Speaking of that, okay, so I know there's already some Mizzou fans, but like last night, I could not settle down and get to bed till like midnight. My stomach was in knots, so I am a Jayhawk fan, if you can't tell. When this nerve is activated, what ends up happening is blood flow has to decide. So if you're stressed, it pulls what we consider to be the back of the brain, and that is the fight, flight, or freeze. And then all of a sudden, we don't have the hunger that's there. Our digestive tract is actually not ready to eat at that time because now it's focusing on other priorities. And then later on, it redistributes, and then all of a sudden, you're hungry. What we're learning now is that actually the gut is the second brain. So it tries to actually send us signals as to what's going wrong. So that could actually translate into different choices around our nutrition, or actually our nutrition can then start impacting our brain and lead us to make different choices as well. When nutrition is out of balance, we get those signals, but we're in a culture that likes to tend to dictate and tell us what to eat, and so we miss that wisdom, and that's one of the things that I want to be able to instill with people that I work with and be able to do in presentations, that it's not necessarily this mysterious craving that you have. You actually might want to listen to what your body is trying to tell you and your brain. So first off, and most importantly, is sleep. If we are not getting not only enough sleep, but quality sleep, then it's really hard to have any kind of connection with our body. So it is the number one performance enhancer, whether it's physical performance or work performance. They still are saying we need 7 to 8 hours. There are some people that can make it on 6 hours, but for the most part, we need that priority. The other part is having deep REM cycle. So when we sleep, or if anybody has what we call wearables, the watches will actually tell you that brings your cortisol levels back down to baseline. Growth hormone is actually secreted at that time, so that helps our muscles recovery. So what they're starting to see in a lot of like chronic fatigue related or inflammatory related conditions, the body is not able to restore and repair like it needs to, and we see more of these diagnoses popping up. The other part is this day-to-day inflammation on the brain lends to more depression and more anxiety because it can't clean the cobwebs. So that's one thing Dr. John Sullivan talks about in his book, is that when we sleep or when we take a power nap, and by a power nap, it just means 30 minutes or less of closing your eyes. You're not actually going to sleep. You get rid of all the thoughts that really don't do you any good. And then you actually store information in your brain while you're sleeping. So that way you have that improved cognition or retention of information. Hence why on the West Coast, they've actually pushed back start times of school to like 9 and 10 a.m. because they want these kids to be able to get more sleep and have more better cognition scores on their test. We also know that there tends to be more impulsive decisions when we don't get enough sleep. So if you think about when you're having to make a decision in a hurry, it's really hard to kind of look at all situations in a calm state, and sleep is a big part of it. I often joked when my daughter was preemie and colicky for like the first year, and I was like, you know, life has changed when you're not fantasizing about going like on the ocean and having Cabana Boys bring you drinks, but it was like dark hotel rooms and Benadryl, because that's all you could think about was, I need sleep, I'm so tired. But how many of us function like that day to day, show up to work, try to show up also for our families? It's really hard. Then anybody that's dealing with anything that puts them at risk, machinery or any other type situation, you look at the fact that the CDC says when you're awake for 17 hours, it's the equivalent of having 2 drinks. Our reaction time is that delayed, so it is something that should be prioritized. Can you tell I'm big on sleep? The next step is the brain needs gas. So I love the Snickers commercial with the hangry, because that really does end up changing our decisions around food. It changes our mood. It changes how we interact with people when the brain is low on gas. Everything that we start, I shouldn't say everything, but for the most part, when we look at things that are focused around fueling, it's always going back to the body and weight. And that's where I think we've forgotten what happens with the brain when it doesn't get enough fuel or it doesn't get a balance of fuel. So the brain in most days uses about 25% of your daily energy needs. On a stressful day, that can go up to 30 to 35%. So it really, really uses a lot of energy, and we want to make sure that it's fed. That way it can do the things that it needs to do. You can be efficient at work, leave, go home, and not feel like you have a lot of loose ends. When you don't have enough, you actually require the brain to have to work even harder, and now it shunts energy going to other parts of the body, like your muscles, and that's where we start to see that utter physical fatigue that kicks in, even though you haven't done anything all day. Or we might even see like muscle tension because your body doesn't have the ability to relax your smooth muscles. So this stuff translates into what we feel physically. We just don't know how to put the puzzle pieces together. In sports, we call it central fatigue. So that's when somebody is trying to push it and they feel like they can't anymore, and so they start to slow down. But in the workplace, we call it like that brain fog. And so many a times, specifically carbohydrates, when we don't have enough, the brain starts to lag, because it is the one organ that has to have glucose. It can use secondary sources, but it takes a long time. And so that's where we see that kind of like, I can't really think on spot. Oh, wait, you should have asked that question. Why didn't you? That's what we refer to as brain fog. The other part too is when blood sugar goes down, it causes a stressor response in the body to free up energy stores. So we flip, you're gonna hear me say a lot, like this is the nice calm part of the brain that can think and make decisions. This is the part that's really impulsive and primal. It flips to that part of it, and it actually makes you agitated, so that way you're thinking about food. And for someone that may be restrictive of the types of foods that they're eating or not getting enough, rather than being present, all they're thinking about is food. Then the next step. So we look at, I'm big on anti-diet approaches, and what that means is overly restrictive diets, or diets that end up cutting out particular groups of foods, end up kind of telling us how we should eat in a mannerism that is opposite of what our body's intuition is, right? So if all of a sudden we're saying like, hey, I'm hungry, a lot of times a diet will say like, don't eat, you're supposed to eat at 10 a.m. and have this set food. Or if you're tracking and you're trying to figure out how to negotiate, in my book, I talk about it like in money. Like if you're trying to negotiate where your money is going, that's a lot of decision. So you'll hear people talk about like, oh, they just have the greatest willpower. At lunchtime, they just go and they choose what they want. Well, it's not so much like they're just genetic great specimens. It's that they just go and like, hey, today, we were talking about burgers. This burger sounds good. I'm gonna have a burger and a salad. Boom, they're done. That's all they give to it. Where when somebody tends to struggle with decision fatigue, they come up to breakfast and they're like, okay, how many carbohydrates am I supposed to have? Oh, wait, is that a good food or a bad food? Is this going to make me hungry an hour and a half later? What am I going to have for a snack? Oh, shoot, I don't even have any oat milk because I haven't gone to the grocery store. And so they've used up all that energy and they haven't even eaten breakfast yet. So when I work with clients, I try to streamline that, and we have like things that are already kind of planned out that are balanced, so we don't have to put a whole lot of mental effort. So this was based off a book with his mouthful of last name, Dr. Baumeister, that talks about willpower. So I'm going to give you a really great piece of advice. If you ever go to court, try to be on the docket first thing in the morning and after lunch. You're welcome. In his book, he actually talks about how when they had case controls that were coming up on parole, that those that met between 10:30 and noon had a 30% lesser chance of being granted parole than the 8 a.m. And then those that were actually from 2:30 to 5 had a 50% less chance of being granted parole. Granted, this wasn't a randomized controlled trial, but the numbers kind of spoke that the hangrier the judge got, the more likely you were to get thrown out or not get parole in court. And the reason for that is they believe we only have so much energy in a given day to make decisions. So you really want to conserve for the things that you want to prioritize and try to streamline the rest and make better decisions off what your body needs by planning ahead of time. What ends up occurring is when we start using all your energy to make decisions, we're not sure if it's what we need, our mood changes. And this is where this oversimplification of I shouldn't eat for my emotions, food should not be for mood, but really food does create your mood. And so you have to understand what it is that your brain is trying to go to and why. So when our energy is low, dopamine is kind of your neurotransmitter that actually is pleasure seeking. So this doesn't just translate into food. This is also something when I work with clients, I ask them like, when you get home, what's the first thing you do? And for a lot of them, it's going and having a drink. And it's not so much that a drink is bad. It's that they're still so wound up from the workday and their brain wants something to just relax that they go and have a cocktail or two. And so there's nothing wrong with that. I love a great glass of wine and I love an old fashioned. But if I'm going to that every single day to be my self-care to unwind, then now you've conditioned your brain that that is the way that you pleasure seek and check the box to be able to rest. So when an underfueled brain is coming home, it's even more going to be prone to that or looking for particular types of food. It also has a role in attention and focus. So when your brain is trying to compete with, I'm hungry, but I also need to get work done. Because you're hungry, the brain is not going to let you focus on the task at hand. It's going to focus on food because remember, now that's primal. That always takes priority. It's not going to be getting your work done. And so until you feed that brain and feed the brain what it needs, it kind of sounds like we're talking about a gremlin, then you're not going to be able to be efficient at your workplace. That's also why we start to see over-reliance on caffeine and energy drinks, kind of that pseudo-energy that makes your brain more alert. But the problem is then we see the crash and then we see more fatigue develop and it's even harder to make those decisions. So always love this, right? Doesn't that look absolutely delicious? Right? Everybody's like shaking their head like that's really cruel to do when we haven't had dinner yet. Any meal plan, diet, approach that tells you that you can't have something only makes you want it that much more. So a lot of times I'll talk, especially with like my younger clients, about like the bad boy phenomenon, right? Like the more you're told to stay away from them, the better looking it gets. But if your parents say, hey, I'm sure he's a nice young gentleman, why didn't you bring him over for dinner? The next time you see him, you're kind of like, well, now wait, I can have him, so now it's not as much appeal. This thing still happens with their food. Like when you're told that you can't have something, and you allow yourself to have that pleasure from it, now you put it front and center. So if we have a stressed, underfueled brain that now is having changes in mood, your brain's like, that will do the trick. Because that food will immediately give me a surge of dopamine and serotonin. I'm gonna go, ooh, that was so good. I just want some more, but tomorrow I can't have it again. So then 5 days later, the same cycle. So we talk about neutralizing food. It doesn't take a nutrition degree to know that a plate of broccoli is gonna have different nutrients and different benefits than a plate of brownies. But you don't want the emotional excitement to come from, I was so good, I only ate broccoli today, because it's gonna drive you then when you're in that state to want the brownie. So I really try to figure out a way that even my most high caliber athletes, we're working cookies and cupcakes into a week because I want them to have that pleasure and connection. And I also want them to be able to say, like, if I want it, I can have it and then be done with it. Same thing with the drink. If they're gonna go enjoy a drink, I want it to be that they're gathered around with their friends, their families, they've got food with them, and it's not they're having a drink sitting by themselves outside because they're trying to decompress. The other part I should add is the tricky part about alcohol is your liver focuses on it first, so it drops your blood sugar and it actually makes you more hungry. So then when you have a couple drinks before you have food, you find yourself starving. That's why we don't have carrots and celery at a bar, right? We have yummy, greasy bar food. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So ways that you can try to optimize this is build it in your day. It needs to be blocked out in your schedule. So many times, I just don't have time to eat. Well, you gotta find a way. So if it means that you're eating something in your hand while you're walking in between meetings, or if you need to stop and put 10 minutes on there, I really think it's important, and I challenge you guys to experiment. See how efficient and how much you've wrapped up the to-do list and what your mood's like at the end of the day when you take that time for self-care and to fuel yourself. I guarantee you're gonna wrap up feeling a whole lot more comfortable than if you're scrambling through and not eating, or you're trying to eat while you're doing 5 other things. There was a study where they looked at, and trust me, I don't wanna sound like, I'll be honest, I sound like a hypocrite, because there are many times that I will actually be eating while I'm working, but one of the things that I'm aware of is I will be hungrier sooner in the day. So the brain needs 2 things. It needs to not only sense that there's fuel in the stomach, but it also needs to sense the yummy taste that comes from that food. So when they did a study in Europe, they took a workplace and they had the same amount of calories, so that way there wasn't a difference in what they were eating. One group went and took it at the break room and they sat and ate, the others worked at their computer. And wasn't that they led to overeating later, but the group that was distracted was hungrier an hour and a half earlier. And so they don't know if it's just that the brain doesn't remember eating, or if it's the fact that maybe they use more fuel because they were working through their lunch break, but just something to think about. And a lot of times when I bring that up with my clients, they're like, that makes a lot of sense. I do find that I could have the same meal prep lunch that I have every day, and when I'm at my computer, I'm hungrier sooner than when if I was going outside to eat at a picnic bench. For those of you that may be in control of this, if there's a meeting, have some lunch that's brought in. I think there's nothing wrong if they can still have productive meetings, have the food there, or be able to provide options that they can come and grab and go. Because we know a lot of times people are scrambling out the door. They're gonna forget their lunch. I'm blessed in the fact that we work in a house, so I keep stuff in the freezer just in case, so I can heat it up if I don't have my lunch. But not everybody is able to pack all that and be able to carry it with them, and that's another great way to support the self-care and health of your employees, which is also gonna get more productivity. So it's okay, we're getting a 2-for-1 special there. Have an A option, a B option, and I joke, the oh shit option, like when you forgot everything, you don't have groceries. It might be, frozen dinners have come a long way. There are things that are more balanced that you can keep one on hand in the freezer, or even Quick Trip. You can actually get a balanced meal from Quick Trip if you have to in a pinch. It's better to have something like that than to run out. So the A option is like, if I could plan and be able to have balance, this is what this would look like. Maybe it's a warm. B might be, maybe you have to drive in between. So I used to try to pack my lunch, and then by the time I would get, when I was consulting, because a lot of times you use that time in between, that's probably your only break, and you're like, shoot, I need to eat at that time. It's not wise to try to eat things that are messy, because then you get in the office and you're like covered in food. So I started using bento boxes and made adult Lunchables. So I'd have like my fruit, my veggie, maybe some cut up deli meat, cheese. I love Triscuits, and that's something that was really easy that I could hold with one hand and drive with the other. And it was a way that I could have lunch. And now I guess like Starbucks and Target stole that, because now they even have like protein boxes and stuff. So I should have trademarked it. Just kidding. But if there's a will, there's a way. And if you take the time on the weekend to plan it, you can have this streamlined in 2 minutes. And again, optimizing your health from the top down by prioritizing your brain will pay off. Check the caffeine intake. So caffeine is not bad. I love my coffee. 200 milligrams or more does start to be a stimulant, not only on your heart, but your brain. And so that gets to be where if you're having 3 to 4 cups of coffee, the other part is because it stimulates your brain, going back to that vagus nerve, it pulls the attention up and then it disconnects from your body. And so it'll shunt your appetite. But what happens is then when you break that caffeine down, then you're starving. And when we get to that starving place, we're more impulsive. That goes back to that cake picture. You don't want a salad at that point. You want something that's going to give you quick energy and make you feel better. And that's how we can balance our choices, is we want our brain to be in an optimal state to make good decisions, not impulsive ones. And then lastly, I put this feed the rainbow. So what we're understanding, and we were talking about this earlier, as our parents and loved ones get older, we start to see that cognitive decline. And a big part of it is that there's inflammation that occurs in the brain. We lose the matter that actually helps us have our cognition and pull on memories. But not only with, flexing the mental muscle by doing things like crossword puzzles, when we continue to eat things that are rich in antioxidants, so like the rainbow of fruits and vegetables and fish and all of those things, we also keep inflammation down in the brain as well. So we see less depression. A lot of times in our realm, we have a crossover with eating disorders, so we work a lot with therapists, and they will view things like depression, anxiety, as parts of inflammation, because it's a brain that's not rested. And so that's its way of adapting to that situation. So like cut up fruits and vegetables, but also just ways that you can add in. Like I always keep canned artichoke hearts or frozen stir-fry vegetables that you can throw in any dish. That's just the same nutrients as if you were to go out and get it from a garden. So now this leads me to our second brain. So we know that we have this highway. How is it communicating and connecting, and how does that impact my mental and physical health? 70% of our immune system is within our gut. 90% of our serotonin receptors are actually connected from the gut to the brain. So that's where we got that saying, like butterflies in the stomach. Like, I had that in the first half of the game last night. Like my stomach was a mess. Then we start talking about how our gut bacteria actually is directly controlled. So our gut bacteria, basically think of it as like the potting soil for nutrient absorption, and hormones are made from that as well. When we have a stressed gut, we have an unhealthy gut that creates bad bacteria, and we don't have good potting soil. So they kind of feed off each other. So the first thing is we want to plant the seed. An underfueled gut, so not having enough nutrition throughout the day and hydration as well, is a stressed gut. So we already are going to set a bad stage for that bacteria to be able to develop. Then we want to have 2 sources a day. In the next slide, I'm going to give examples of fermented foods, which are probiotics. So find a way to have yogurt as a snack. Maybe you like kombucha tea and you have that with your lunch. Build that in a consistent basis. And now you've actually been able to change the potting soil. Then we're going to feed it. And that's with the things that are prebiotic foods as well. Managing your stress is really important. So when you meditate, you hum, right? So when you hum, where do you feel that within your body? Anyone point to it? Like right here. So that's actually your nerve right there that sits in between your rib cage. So if you can try to actually occasionally do deep breathing, you bring the heart rate down. And there's actually studies, that's why yoga has been so powerful for lowering hypertension, is it's not just the stretching component, it's the breathing component that's within yoga. Well, you can do that within your workspace as well. If you're going into a meeting or just sitting at your desk, I've literally told my clients that sometimes are like uber stressed, go take long bathroom breaks. Most of the time, nobody's gonna track you in there to see what you're doing. And if you gotta sit in there and take a few minutes to breathe, or like Calm would even have like 1 minute guided meditations on there, then at least that takes you from a 10 to a 9. And over time, that will help you with your health as well. So even though it doesn't feel like a lot, it's not a nice beach vacation, it will start to make impacts over time. Sarah, how am I on time? 4:46. Yeah. So these are your probiotic rich foods. So kefir milk, most people don't even know or think of kefir milk. It actually has 10 times the probiotics that yogurt do. It's a great thing that you can add in a smoothie or just be able to have in a small glass. Again, for mental health over in Europe, they actually have these in milk cartons like they would. And so they hand that out, and they have far significant incidences of depression and anxiety. And they believe a lot of it is, one, they also have a lot of natural food sources that come. So they're already rich with good bacteria, but they put an emphasis on consuming kefir milk. Kombucha tea has gotten really popular. So that's something that you don't have to drink a whole bottle a day. Just break it into like 3 to 4 ounces and have it with the meal. Sauerkraut. If you go on Pinterest, you can actually find some pretty creative ways of using sauerkraut, like even making egg scrambles and things like that. So build it in and you'll see definitely the benefit. Then you want to feed it. So be able to find things like have oatmeal for your breakfast, add in those stir fries. You hear me talk about my artichoke hearts. I like to throw in like a pasta or a salad. This will help continue to be able to have the good bacteria. If not, what we see in reverse is the body is keeping the score somehow. So one of the things that we talk about is we don't just ignore if somebody's coming in and they want to talk about their weight, but I always talk about what are the things that might be influencing unintentional weight gain or weight loss. And we are starting to see this disruption in sleep, gut health, all as a result, because it starts to actually change your blood sugar. It changes the hormones that impact your appetite. So we do see things show up physically when we're not having optimal gut health and we're not taking care of our brain. Another huge one is stomach pain. So when a gut is stressed, you basically have these little villi that sit on your gut and they're like speed bumps. So the very tip is lactase, which digests lactose. And then we have things that digest carbohydrate. And then here's our blood-brain barrier for gluten. When a gut's stressed, it's kind of like the skin. I use this analogy a lot with my clients. So if we have a lotion or a body wash that we use every day, nothing happens to our skin. If we got a big cut or a horrific sunburn and we use that lotion, what's going to happen? Oh, that burns, right? I better not use that. But what happens with nutrition is people are like, oh, I'm allergic to that food. I can't have that anymore. I need to cut out. And you might temporarily while you have the burn, but what really needs to happen is you need to heal the gut, and then you need to reintroduce this food so you have plenty of variety. So we're seeing a lot of foods get cut out and kind of demonized when it's really not the food's fault. It's the fact that we have a stressed, unhealthy gut. Then we slowly start to add that in. So a lot of digestive disorders, when they come in to see me, the very first thing I look at is their self-care practices. Then we build in making sure they have plenty of probiotic-rich foods, things to feed it, and then we slowly start integrating those foods back in, because you just never know when those foods are going to cross your path, and you want to feel like you have all these choices, especially if you're feeding a family. You don't want to feel like, well, mom's got to have this separate food and dad's got to have this, or this kid does. It's something that everybody can eat together. The other piece of this is, as I already alluded to, the chronic pain and reoccurring headaches. When there is a disruption, that also means that we don't have enough serotonin in our brain, and serotonin will carry our tryptophan, and that's what keeps our brain calm. Not only calm in thoughts, but also calm in the smooth muscle that's in the brain. So when we get anxious, what do? Especially if we're looking at a screen, we start getting more tense, and that's where we see more reoccurring headaches as well. And most people would not put those puzzle pieces together when they're thinking about why they have headaches. So I'm a big believer in magnesium for that reason. Magnesium helps with sleep. It helps with smooth muscles, so we see less headaches. So trying to get enough in the diet, if not, then looking at a supplemental form. The good thing is that there's less risk with taking something like magnesium versus other supplements. Hopefully nobody's asleep yet. It's great. Where this can translate into your health is we see in certain conditions like iron deficiency. So it's kind of the chicken or the egg conundrum. Stress can actually create more iron deficiencies, and this doesn't tend to get looked at a lot when we get past the adolescent population, and it sure should. Because sometimes either due to our nutrition patterns, stress, I'm seeing in those that have had post-COVID some of the craziest nutritional deficiencies, and there's nothing out there literature-wise to back it up. But if somebody comes in and they're telling me these clusters of symptoms, like, let's go get your blood work checked, shocking the amount of anemias and vitamin D and B12. So if any of you have struggled with that, I would go in and get a nice panel from your doctor just to make sure, because of the immune response that occurred with COVID. Some people was minor, some people was really significant, and we just don't know how to treat or test for that in that post-COVID era. The other part too is that iron is a part of our brain energy metabolism. So when iron is low, it actually requires our brain to have to work harder because it creates anaerobic stress on it. So having that checked, if you've had it checked twice and you don't typically have anemia, you probably don't need to. But if you had, I would recommend at least once or twice a year continuing to have it checked. Another area that gets overlooked when we talk about health and stress is thyroid. Now, that's not to be dismissive of those that have had genetic hypothyroidism, but thyroid regulates our metabolism. So it regulates not only the physical, but the brain piece of it. So if you're chronically having to use the fight, flight, or freeze part of it, you're burning through that thyroid hormone, and that's where we start to see thyroid dysfunction as well. So making sure you have that checked. If you start to notice your mood change, look to see what your thyroid health is, checking those labs as well, but also flip-flopping. If you're noticing that thyroid is off, it could be too that's linked to your mood, and so bringing that, if you're seeing a provider or a therapist, that it may be some rest and nutrition could help before you might need medications. I'm not dismissing medications, I'm just saying sometimes it's worth experimenting before you get to that point. We also see in these two groups, these are ones that are really prone to the use of energy drinks, caffeine, doping when I work with athletes, or even some body image issues as well. Because I say, like, we all can remember, like, the last time we've had a stomach flu, like, it kind of traumatizes you. Like, nobody goes into the mirror after the stomach flu and is like, I look really great today, right? When you're stuck in that, like, my body feels like crap, I'm tired all the time, it really does lend to more body image issues. And so we see that develop sometimes into muscle dysmorphia or body image dysmorphia, or even an eating disorder. The next one that never gets talked about is our sex hormones in regards to our mental health. So estrogen, that's why when somebody goes into perimenopausal or menopausal, why they feel so angry and agitated is that estrogen is actually a serotonin booster, and so it calms the brain. Same thing with testosterone. Going back with our thyroid, if our body is not having enough rest, it's chronically stressed, it's not getting enough fuel, why would it think about reproduction? So the first thing it does is it drops that down. Now, some of you, like myself, I'm past that. I'm not necessarily thinking about reproduction, but when I start thinking about my health Estrogen and testosterone dilate our blood vessels. So we see when there's a drop in that, that's where we start getting heart disease. And a lot of times, what do? Then we start hyper-focusing on food, but it might be going back to the root of it, why your body is not producing those as much or to the level that they should be. And that starts getting in the way of things that are important when you have a partner or spouse, like sex drive. And I don't think anybody talks about that in regards to our physical and mental health. But a lot of it, again, goes back to that self-care. So last but not least, on the food piece of it, I look at foods that are really known for helping our brain health. And one that tends to get overlooked is zinc. So zinc is really big with our immune system, but also our immune system in the brain. So BDNF is a mouthful, but it's brain-derived naphtropeptide factor. Don't worry, you don't have to say that before we leave. But that's what creates new cells in our brain. Slow, gentle walking does the same thing. So if you have a way that you can actually, one of the things I love to do with my clients is walking sessions. One, it gets them from not being so anxious. Two, they actually will be able to talk and retain more information when we're walking, and then we're also physically more relaxed. And some people are using that in the workplace now, where they may go for a 15, 20-minute walk, talk about things, then go back and process on notes. You're actually helping generate more brain cells, which is going to help your productivity in the long run. The other thing that we start looking at is the role in antidepressive effects when we're having things like zinc. So I see this a lot with my clients that have started to cut out red meat. We know that there's some changes physically, but the one thing that really hasn't been challenged is some of these cutting out of meats and proteins starting to link to more mental health. Can we find a way that they can blend both of these in and optimize how they feel physically and mentally? So highly recommend go get your oysters from Pearl Tavern tonight and get your zinc, right? Magnesium I've already talked about. It's one of the things that really helps with sleep. I really like magnesium about an hour before bed. It helps kind of calm your brain down, but also relaxes your smooth muscles, and then helps to increase the production of serotonin and dopamine as well. So naturally through food, it synthesizes melatonin. So as the sun goes down, our melatonin glands in the back of our eye, it should start to trigger melatonin, and then that's when we get kind of groggy and sleepy and shouldn't be able to have as much active thoughts. Or it may rewire when you're sleeping at night. Magnesium will help enhance both of those cycles. And then same thing with selenium that we find in grains. It actually helps to enhance the production of iodine, and a particular enzyme with iodine that produces our thyroid hormone. So we see a lot of confusion when somebody may be diagnosed with a condition like thyroid disease or Hashimoto's that tends to be anti-inflammatory. The very first thing they're told is to cut out all these foods. And they may need to shift the balance on them, but then are we going to lose our ability to create these enzymes and hormones that may actually enhance their thyroid health? So I'm sure, as you can see, the brain will always find a way to win, whether it's in how you physically feel, whether it's in the choices that you make, whether it's in your mood, how you interact with people. And I think it's better just to stop fighting it and actually listen to it and try to figure out how to best optimize it. Variety is a spice of life. Not only do we get a balance of different nutrients, we also don't get flavor fatigue or boredom. It's nice to try things that have different flavor. And when you do, then you're done with it. So the French had this down to a science. Does anybody know why it's called the petit four? Why they created that dessert? So they believe if you have something that is the most optimist, richness, decadent flavor, all it takes is 4 bites or around that for you to have enough pleasure from that food. So I challenge you, the next time you go in and you've got a yummy food and you're giving yourself permission, count when it takes that you're like, oh, that was so good, that was so rich. All right, so this helps us be able to have more pleasure from our food. And if it takes 6 bites, that's all right too. Rest is best. We have demonized rest. This is something I fight every day with my clients, especially those that maybe don't want to take a day off from the gym or they don't want to take a day off of work. I started working through this book, and I'm not pushing anything spiritual. I just want to say that it's called The Rest of God. And it was actually reframing what the Sabbath does in our spiritual and physical health. So I made myself slow down and not rush through it and only do a couple days. But what I found is, and Sarah's going to laugh, I do take power naps. I will close the door in my office and be like, guys, I'm going to go lay down for a little bit. And when I wake up, I'm not yawning in front of my clients. I'm able to be more present. I don't have as many headaches as I did, especially during COVID. So it does really make a difference, and it helps your brain be able to recharge as well. When we nourish, we stay focused and we stay connected. And that's one of the things that's most important in our work performance, our life, everything else. So that way we can optimize what we're set out to do. And who can guess where I got this? This is one of my favorite. Be a scientist, not a preacher, nor a prosecutor. Oh, nobody guessed where. Is anybody Adam Grant fans? No? Okay, I love him. So he talks about how we rethink. So we're not necessarily get on our moral high ground. This is the way I feel like things should be done. And we're not prosecuting and saying, no, you're wrong. When we're scientists, we're always curious. There is no wrong way. You just kind of continue to go at it. So I don't fight my clients. If they feel like something works for them, I'm like, fine. Let's keep at it, and let's find ways that you can also continue to be curious, because life is always changing and you may need different things as well. Last but not least, really try to avoid the diet pitfall. Your body does have the wisdom to tell you what to need. You don't have to have something dictate that to you. And I know that's hard because it's a billion-dollar industry. It's everywhere you turn. But the reason it's a billion-dollar industry is because it doesn't work. And so we see more issues with heart health, with diabetes, with weight, when we try to push our body and brain into doing something that it doesn't want to. So last but not least, thank you very much. So hopefully at some point you guys can stop by. We're wrapping up our house on 2nd Street. But I'm Becca, that's Sarah. We'll have Tess that you might see occasionally. That's Best Dog that's out on the front porch. So thank you.